Welcome to Frontline Conversations. I'm Amit Baruah with this episode from Colombo. I'm at the residence of Professor Jayadeva Uyangoda, Emeritus Professor of Political Science of the University of Colombo, long-time watcher, uh, good friend of India, keen analyst. We've been reading his pieces over the years, over the decades. And I'm happy to do this interview with him now. And Professor Uyangoda, my first question, what do the results of the 14th of November mean for Sri Lanka?
Well, 14th of November results in a way reconfirmed the outcome of the presidential election that was held in September, the 21st of September. So there are a number of significant dimensions of this, the collective impact of these two elections. One is that for the first time in Sri Lanka, the political power was shifted towards a political movement that represented the subordinate social classes, the poor and the non-elite social classes. That shift occurred peacefully without any violence, and also the since independence, actually since 1931, you could say, when we got the universal franchise, political power through elections has always been the monopoly of the Sri Lankan, elite social classes. And democracy did not change that. Democracy only gave electoral power to the voter, the people. But the 2022, there was actually a very significant citizens' protest movement. You may have heard about it or read about it. And that was
After
that
the
marked
economic crisis?
yeah, after the economic crisis and this public health crisis by COVID-19. And that marked something like a paradigm change in Sri Lankan politics. The people came to the streets and demanded that they should be given the right to own democracy, right? And that challenged the authority and also dominance of the elite ruling classes in Sri Lanka. And citizens to protest, forced the president, the prime minister to resign, but it did not lead to an immediate government change. But the its impact has been so significant, so far-reaching, that the outcome of the presidential election and also the outcome of the parliamentary election just the other day are culminations of the process of change initiated by citizens themselves. So, in that sense, this is a kind of paradigm change in Sri Lankan politics from the point of view of who rules the country, which political class or which social class rules the country. In that sense, there's a very significant transformation.
So you mean to say that political power has, in a sense, gone out of the hands of the Colombo elite?
Exactly. That's exactly what has happened. At least temporarily.
At least temporarily. And the other dimension is that, the National People's Power has even won 3 out of the 6 seats from Jaffna electoral district. So people, it would appear, have crossed ethnic lines to vote in this election. Why do you think that has happened?
You see, that has happened due to a number of reasons. One of the reasons is that, like what has happened in the Sinhalese majority southern areas, in the northern Tamil society as well as the Muslim society, there is a very parallel transformation. That transformation signifies that people generally have trust, rather have lost their trust in the traditional political parties and the traditional political leadership. So in the southern Sinhalese majority society, actually there was no political vacuum. The NPP could then, step into that vacuum and, give leadership for people for electoral change and political change. But in the northern society, Tamil society, still there is no, agency from the Tamil society itself to fill that vacuum. So the NPP could really, appeal to particularly the disenchanted Tamil voters and the youth were looking for political alternatives. So they couldn't find an effective political alternative to the traditional leadership from within the Tamil polity. So that's, I think, one of the reasons why the NPP has been able to change the electoral map in the northern province and to a significant extent the eastern province as well.
So what are, Professor, what are your hopes from this government?
Well, you see, Anna, I would say there are a lot of hopes from the people. There's a lot of popular hopes and expectations. I think one hope is that there should be a sustainable and permanent change in who rules, who governs the country. Right. In other words, this political power that has been now shifted away from the elites would not go back to the elites.
So it shouldn't be like a one-off.
Yes.
It
yes.
should be continuous.
Well, there'll be no NPP, but there can be other political parties also in the future emerging to represent the interests and demands of the subordinate social classes, who represent the actual majority in Sri Lanka. Sinhala Tamil and Muslim societies and upcountry Tamil society. Then there are a lot of popular expectations actually. One is that this Sri Lanka is in a terrible economic crisis, and that crisis has also caused this political change. But people expect some kind of economic relief, because the cost of living, inflation have gone up dramatically, and people find it very difficult to economically survive. And for 3 years, they have tolerated it, but it has come to a point where people need some state support in the form of either welfare programs or some subsidies or some kind of economic relief for people to ensure that they can survive. And and also the question of corruption actually, and abuse of political power. These are two key reasons why people have voted the NPP into power, because the NPP has promised that they will investigate into corruption and also serious political and human rights violations and political crimes. And so the people want this the people who are responsible for these human rights violations and corruption, the things to be punished actually. So people have already punished this political class by voting them out of power, but people are not happy with that outcome. That is.
So speaking of massive mandates, we also saw, few years ago, a massive mandate for Gotabaya Rajapaksa.
Right.
This similarly is a massive mandate for the NPP. And two very different political approaches, two very different political leaders.
Right.
So within a space of, a couple of years, we see this. How do you read that?
You see, in 2019, the mandate that Gotabaya Rajapaksa got was built or constructed on a single and nationalist mobilization, ideological mobilization. There's no questions of economic justice, social transformation, or democratization that are not in the agenda. But what is different this time is that all these things are in the political agenda. That's why the NPP describes itself as a transformative agency for change, not merely a reformist party. So in my own analysis, I think that it is better to describe NPP as a party that is committed to social and political transformation than reform. It's not merely a reformist party. It has a transformationist agenda. So that's the difference.
And what is your sense? I mean, with all these IMF conditionalities that already have been imposed on Sri Lanka, and the position of the NPP, I mean, how will the NPP, you think, negotiate these obvious restrictions on policy that have been imposed already on Sri Lanka?
During the election campaign and before the election campaign, they took up the position that they want to renegotiate with the IMF these conditions. But I think they have slightly modified their position now after coming into power. They don't want to change the agreement that Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe and the president has entered into with the IMF. It's very difficult. Actually, there are a lot of practical difficulties in doing that. So, what their new attitude is can be described as a pragmatic attitude. They have to work with the IMF, but at the same time, they have to also fulfill the pledges they have made to the people. So, my own feeling is that they will try to negotiate for something like it's not a, I don't think they will use the terminology social welfare program, but something similar to that, to assist the provide state assistance to the low-income families. It can also be in the form of, reducing that value-added tax so that cost of living would be lowered. So I think that's a commitment, political and moral commitment that government cannot easily ignore. So I think on the other hand, the IMF will also have to respect the mandate the government has obtained from the people. There's a massive mandate that the government has obtained from the people. So it's very difficult for the IMF also to ignore them totally. And the way IMF dealt with Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe, it's not going to be repeated. It's not easy either for the IMF or the government to repeat the same, mode of negotiations between Ranil Wickremesinghe government and the IMF. My own feeling is that IMF will also have to be pragmatic to some extent in order to honor and respect the popular mandate in Sri Lanka that government has got.
Professor Uyangoda, you refer to the massive mandate. So the massive mandate also means that constitutional changes are very much possible if the government decides to move forward with those constitutional changes. And I understand the NPP is also committed to abolishing the executive presidency. But we've seen in the past, parties and presidents who promised to abolish the executive presidency seem to change their mind often, once they, assume power or sit on the president's chair. Do you think this time it will be different?
Well, there's a major difference this time that the political will, the previous governments or the president didn't have a real political will to abolish the executive presidential system. They have actually the maximum that they went was in 2015, this 19th Amendment. That did not abolish the executive president system. It only reformed it, reduction of powers of the executive president. But this time, this is a government which has the political will. It doesn't have the institutional and constitutional barriers either. So they can win in parliament, they can also easily win a referendum. But my concern is something different. Is that there will be a lot of uncertainties in the country. If the IMF program continues to be there without major changes, so the economic burden that people are now suffering from will continue. So to what extent the government can contain the social discontent and also disenchantment. So in a situation like that, how would the government abolish the executive presidential system and move towards the parliamentary system? So that would be a challenge for the government, and I hope that government's political will enable them to, go through that challenge as well. But on the other hand, moving towards the parliamentary system of government is not enough, because we have a history of, governments and political leaders abusing political power in a very arbitrary and authoritarian and autocratic manner. So in the new parliamentary system in Sri Lanka, there should be strong frame of checks and balances to prevent abuse of power.
And what is your sense on the ethnic issue? I mean, we've had this 26-year long insurgency by the LTT, which ended in March 2009, suddenly ended in March 2009. And what we have really is now the 13th Amendment to the Sri Lankan Constitution. Many friends have told me that India is perhaps more attached to the 13th Amendment than Sri Lanka is. But I want to ask you, I mean, if there is to be a rewriting of the Constitution eventually, if not now, in a few years time or down the line, What is it, do you think, that the NPP will extend to the Tamil people? Will they look at it in a traditional way? In the past, they have, the JVP has stood for the scrapping of the 13th Amendment. So, what is your sense now that they have got so much support from the North and the East? You think their approach will be different? And what do you think would be a good approach on the issue now?
I want to make 2 points. Yeah. First, the Tamil polity has also changed. The traditional political class and political leadership and politicians who really, you know, uh, emphasize on the importance of the 13th Amendments and more devolution like 13 plus. That class has been, in a way, partially defeated by the voters in Jaffna and northeastern province as well. So they are no longer a powerful voice in Tamil, defined power, the Tamil politics. So in the Tamil polity, there seems to be a new generation of politicians as well as citizens who do not attach much political and emotional significance to the 13th Amendment. Right? That's one. Secondly, the JVP's position or the NPP's position has also been indicating that they will continue to have the provincial council system, 13th Amendment, but they do not want to follow the same discourse or same political language that the previous generation of politicians, whether in the south or the north, or Indian politicians have been using, the devolution 13th Amendment. They want to redefine the political discourse on the ethnic
Very differently.
problem very differently. It's something like this. It's my own interpretation of the JVP's and PP's approach is something like this. They recognize there are serious economic, cultural, and political, demands by the Tamil polity, and they have not been met at all, even if they have been provincial council system. Right? The 13th Amendment provincial council system actually have been defunct for about 10 years now. Right? Therefore, they think that no, they do not want to do away with the provincial council system as such. They want to continue with the provincial council system. They want to continue with the 13th Amendment until such time that some kind of a strong process of reconciliation has been achieved, bringing similar Tamil and Muslim communities together. So their argument is also that provincial council was needed, said system was needed, 13th Amendment was needed at a time when Sinhalese, Tamil and Muslim communities looked at each other as enemies, each other as a source of threat. So their reading of the change, new circumstances, new political conditions in the north and the east and the south is that there are now real possibilities for reconciliation. And the NPP government wants to be the agency for that reconciliation. Right? And then once the communities achieve the new kind of understanding and reconciliation, probably, according to their thinking, uh, the people can look for an alternative to the 13th Amendment and the provincial council system. What is that alternative is not yet very clear. So I have a feeling that, when the new government wants to, go for a new constitution, they will have to have some framework of a settlement.
In any case, this kind of confrontationist approach between Tamil politicians and Sinhala politicians, which has marked Sri Lanka for the past several decades, that in a sense has ended.
That phase is over. I thought the NPPs, I think the important point that the NPP is making is that confrontational phase is now over. There are new generation like post 1983 or post 1987. Now there's a new generation of Sinhalese and Tamils and Muslims. So they would want to look for other solutions, other options worked out by themselves. So kind of, the new version of a, homegrown solution, but worked out by the new generation of Sri Lankan citizens. That's my feeling. That's my interpretation of their approach.
And what is your sense? A new government has been formed. the ministers are now known. What is your sense of the kind of talent that has been tapped by the president and the prime minister in the new government?
When you look at the cabinet, you could see that many of them are professionals. It's kind of meritocratic, cabinet. And most of the MPs probably are not like that. Or most of the MPs come from the NPP, JVP, political cadres who have been doing politics for many, many years with a lot of experience in politics. But the cabinet is a kind of a meritocratic, technocratic entity. So the experience, you see the Sri Lankan politics from independence, particularly after 1956, has been such that always there's induction of new people to the cabinet, first timers. It's not a new thing. I think this whole narrative about this inexperience come from the defeated Colombo elite, right? This is very classist. This during the election campaign, both presidential and parliamentary, the Colombo elite reacted to the emergence of the NPP as a formidable political uh, force, primarily from a perspective of class and cultural superiority, right? Saying that who are these people, right? Who have no, even some people even said that these are the people who cannot even speak English. That kind of, cultural and class and social prejudices. So this inexperienced narrative is also a part of that, kind of elitist, discourse that expresses the kind of a sense of despair, actually. The Colombo elite, the traditional ruling elite, they are kind of very traumatized now. Because they know that they are not only not in power, but also they have a sense of great deal of insecurity. They don't feel that there's anybody to protect them. When Rajapakshas were in power, Ranil Wickremesinghe and the crowd knew that Rajapaksa will not harm them, protect them. When Wickremesinghe was in power, Rajapakshas knew that, despite their political differences and political, kind of hatred with each other, but the other side will protect them. So now this political class, defeated political class and their backers all feel very insecure because they don't have anybody in the system, in the state to protect them.
I see from the newspapers that, including the prime minister, there are two women in the cabinet, and plus there's no Muslim representation.
Yeah.
So does that, in any case, detract from the nature of the government that's been formed?
I really don't know. I'm also surprised why there's not a single Muslim. So that has become now, a topic of conversation in Colombo. And I don't know. I can't answer that question because I was also surprised why there wasn't a Muslim.
Right. And the other question that I want to ask you, Professor Uyangoda, is the whole how this government is going to deal with the rest of the world. Of course, we discussed the IMF, but how they will deal with the equations with Western countries, especially the United States and India and China. How do you think these equations will be tackled by the new government?
The sense I am getting from this government is that they have a very pragmatic foreign policy with regard to India, China, US, and regional powers and global powers. They're very pragmatic foreign policy. Sometimes, some people say the government might be pro-China or pro-India. No, I don't think so. That's a very narrow way of understanding the dynamics of this government. It's a very pragmatic government. They want to succeed, actually. They don't want to, create problems for themselves by taking wrong steps. Even for the past 2 months, President Kumar Dissanayake indicated that he is very, very careful in whatever he does or he does not do. So that
We
means
can
that
expect
sense of
more.
pragmatism.
We can expect a very pragmatic approach.
Pragmatic, and also they want to be in power for 5 years. They don't want any major crisis that would,
Derail the
derail their course.
And over the years, what would you say? India Sri Lanka relations, we all know, have been through good periods, bad periods. I mean, it is a relationship. very deep relationship also. How would you assess, the state of our relationship now, and looking forward, how do you think it might develop?
But India, in my view, should be sensitive to the public opinion in Sri Lanka. Because even this the question of Adani's investment in Sri Lanka, there's a tremendous concern among a lot of people in Sri Lanka about environmental impact on it, about these wind power projects in the north, and also the power, excessive power that Adani's and also that company will have over Sri Lanka's, generation and distribution of power. They're very similar to what happened in Bangladesh the other day. So people know about these complex, consequences of this close economic relations with India and Sri Lanka. So, you said India, rightly or wrongly, has a very complicated history in its relations with Sri Lanka. But people still, don't want to forget that part of history. So therefore, even in the when Gotabaya Rajapaksa government came into power, what happened was India supported, they backed the Rajapakshas, and they had created a bad image of India in Sri Lanka among Sri Lankan citizens. So now the new government, NPP government, is a challenge for the Modi government, because how to deal with a new generation of political leaders. I don't think Indians expected NPP to win the election. They thought that either SJB or Ranil Wickremesinghe would win. So this is a learning experience for them as well. But I think fundamental lesson India should learn from the past experiences is that they should respect the changing public opinion in the country.
And finally, Professor Uyangoda, Sri Lanka seems to be one positive spot in South Asia currently. Most South Asian countries, if not all, are going through their share of troubles, economic, political, religious, social, cultural. So, how would you situate Sri Lanka in all this?
I think that Sri Lanka is the only country in South Asia that has some political hope in a positive sense. Look at what happened in Pakistan and Bangladesh, for example. There's a lot of popular citizens movements to change the system, but they have not been able to do any significant impact on the existing corrupt political system. In Bangladesh, this young student movement managed to dislodge Awami League from power, but still there's a political vacuum in Bangladesh. You see, one of the comparative lessons that one has to learn with regard to Bangladesh's situation is that Sri Lanka, at least there was NPP to fill the vacancy. There's a vacuum, right? And there was a new agency to make use of the new political situation that is created by the mass movement. Bangladesh doesn't have that. My fear is that in Bangladesh, like what happened in Egypt after these uprisings, the right-wing group, the Islamic group, might uh, come into power through elections. Because they don't have a moderate, secular political force. Because Awami League historically has represented that secular, moderate, democratic wing in Bangladesh politics. We don't have one that in Bangladesh. So in Nepal, continuing political crisis similarly. So I think India is a huge, one of the most complex political the situations one can observe in South Asia is India. India is at one level moving towards a relentless process of autocratization, a relentless process of Hindu majoritarianization of the state, politics, culture. So Congress party and opposition, Congress party is no longer able to, make a significant influence or rather intervention in politics and change the direction of Indian politics. Pakistan, very crisis slightly similar to the Indian crisis because there's no significant opposition force that can change the political directions of Pakistan towards demilitarization, democratization, to bring the divided country together. One of the Sri Lanka's current change suggests is that this. NPP also emerges as a political force that can bring the society together. It's a kind of a agency for
Assimilation.
yeah, actually reunification in a
Reunification.
divided society. So in the society, say India, Pakistan, deeply divided. There's no force, political force, that can bring the entire society together with a positive, democratic political hope for a better future and inclusive, future.
So, overall, you see a rather bleak picture for South
For
Asia.
South Asia, actually, South Asia is in continuing turmoil. Sometimes, there was a time when we were kind of joking with our South Asian friends, you all should come to migrate to Sri Lanka and obtain Sri Lanka citizenship. We were just joking about it. But actually, uh, it's very difficult to repeat what, Sri Lanka is a very small, tiny little country, but still how the society transforms itself. Look at the way Sri Lankan democracy has been altered by citizens themselves. This 2022, against this backdrop of severe economic crisis and increasing trend towards autocratization, the people decided that they have to take ownership of democracy back into their hands. Right? It only partially happened in Pakistan, rather in Bangladesh. Bangladesh, student movement, they also decided that they should take the political process into their own hands. But beyond that, there's no agency capable of, giving political directions to society. So you have the same crisis in India in a very massive scale.
Professor Uyangoda, thank you so much for talking to Frontline Conversations. We've covered a wide range from Sri Lanka to South Asia, and I hope to be in a position to speak to you again. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to talk to your readers.